This video is in two parts. The first part is a recap of where we are now with regards to the Brexit process. The second part is a more general monologue concerning the current arguments which the Remain side are clinging to.
So the next Conservative manifesto in 2015 will ask for a mandate from the British people for a Conservative government to negotiate a new settlement with our European partners in the next Parliament. We will give the British people a referendum with a very simple in or out choice: to stay in the European Union on these new terms or to come out altogether. It will be an in-out referendum. It is time for the British people to have their say. Now, I say to the British people, this will be your decision.
I've just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, and I will now form a majority Conservative government.
Tory scum! Tory scum! Tory scum! Tory scum!
Mr. Speaker, this is a simple but vital piece of legislation. It has one clear purpose: to deliver on our promise to give the British people the final say on our EU membership in an in-out referendum by the end of 2017.
This deal has delivered on the commitments I made at the beginning of this renegotiation process. Britain will be permanently out of ever closer union, never part of a European superstate. There will be tough new restrictions on access to our welfare system for EU migrants, no more something for nothing. Britain will never join the euro, and we've secured vital protections for our economy and a full say over the rules of the free trade single market while remaining outside the euro. I believe that this is enough for me to recommend that the United Kingdom remain in the European Union, having the best of both worlds.
I have to add that the British policy makers and the British voters have to know that there will be no kind of any renegotiation. We have concluded a deal with the Prime Minister. He got the maximum he could receive, and we gave the maximum we could give, so there will be no kind of renegotiation, nor on the agreement we found, I think, in February, nor as far as any kind of treaty negotiation are concerned. Out is out.
Well, at 20 minutes to 5, we can now say the decision taken in 1975 by this country to join the common market has been reversed by this referendum to leave the EU. We are absolutely clear now that there is no way that the Remain side can win. It looks as though the gap's going to be something like 52 to 48, so a 4-point lead for leaving the EU.
The British people have voted to leave the European Union, and their will must be respected. A negotiation with the European Union will need to begin under a new Prime Minister. And I think it's right that this new Prime Minister takes the decision about when to trigger Article 50 and start the formal and legal process of leaving the EU.
Black or white, unite and fight, defend migrant rights!
Having voted to leave, I know that the public will soon expect to see on the horizon the point at which Britain does formally leave the European Union. So let me be absolutely clear. We will invoke Article 50 no later than the end of March next year.
It's not about how anyone voted. The judgment, I hope, when it's read by the government, that they will make the wise decision of not appealing.
The government disagrees with the court's judgment. The country voted to leave the European Union in a referendum approved by an Act of Parliament. Our position remains that the only means of leaving is through the procedure set out in Article 50, and that triggering Article 50 is properly a matter for the government using its prerogative powers. We will appeal, as a result, we will appeal the High Court's judgment at the Supreme Court.
Brexit! Stop Brexit now! Brexit is racist! Stop Brexit now! Brexit is racist! Brexit now! Brexit is racist! Stop Brexit now! Brexit is racist! Back! Theresa May! Here on say! Immigrants are here to stay! Brexit is racist! Stop Brexit now! Brexit is racist! Stop Brexit now! Brexit is racist! Stop Brexit now!
British MPs have voted to support the government's timetable for Brexit after a potential rebellion in the House of Commons was avoided.
But can I just say to the honourable gentleman, at the end there he said, should we leave the EU? I can tell him we will be leaving the EU.
Fortunately, 6 months on from the vote, most of the spurious and dumb arguments, such as the referendum was only advisory, we can ignore the result, have been quite rightly shown to be the rantings of bad losers, and the Remoaners are left with really only 2 avenues to argue their case. The first is the legal challenge currently being considered by the Supreme Court. The basic gist of this is that the government doesn't have the right to invoke Article 50 and take away our rights without Parliament giving it the go-ahead first. As this was an action brought by a crowd-funded whinge fest, I expect the previous ruling will be overturned by the Supreme Court. Some of the Supreme Court proceedings were broadcast and I can recommend them to anyone who is so inclined. However, for brevity, as I understand it, the arguments in the government's favour were as follows. International treaties fall under the purview of the government to negotiate and for Parliament to ratify or reject. Parliament, where it wants to be involved in the process, has legislated in the past to do so, and this includes the Lisbon Treaty, although they specifically did not legislate anything in regards to triggering Article 50. Parliament passed the EU referendum bill knowing full well that it was the intention of the UK government to implement the decision and thus had the opportunity to insert additional parliamentary rights over the implementation of the result at that time had it wished to do so. Therefore, it is not unreasonable to expect that Article 50 will be invoked by the government after a direct referendum result in favour of leave. In addition to these arguments, regardless of the outcome of the court case, the government has made an agreement with Parliament over Article 50 where Parliament won't block Article 50 if the government provides more information about its strategy. And finally, of course, since the proposed Great Repeal Bill will incorporate all existing EU law into UK law, no actual rights will be lost through the UK leaving the EU without further acts of Parliament.
What we will be doing is repealing that European Communities Act. What will happen is we will take European law into UK law. Then because we will then be independent and sovereign in relation to this, we will be able to decide on those laws. Parliament will be able to decide whether we wish to change those or keep those laws.
The second issue is to do with membership of the single market, or rather access to it. The single market is the EU for all intents and purposes, so we will obviously no longer be a member, but I digress. The argument is that we must maintain access to the single market. Nick Clegg even claimed that no one mentioned leaving the single market during the referendum debate.
Are you saying that people didn't know that that's what was on the table during the campaign, was to leave the single market?
It wasn't even debated. If we leave, would be to leave the EU and leave the single market.
Should we come out the single market?
I think that is almost certainly would be the case, yes.
Do you want us to stay inside the single market, yes or no?
No, we should be outside the single market.
I had Michael Gove in that chair and I said, after Brexit, will we be in the European single market, yes or no? And he said no.
And he was right.
So we won't be in the European
single
market.
Michael, yeah, absolutely.
We'd be out of the single market. That's the reality. Britain would be quitting the single market.
People did know.
That clip never gets old. Clegg did, however, make one valid point, which was that most people he spoke to wanted to keep access to the single market. This is probably a fair reflection of the views of the electorate. However, it is not a valid argument for throwing away all the other reasons that the electorate voted leave. Given the fact it is unlikely that the EU will allow the UK to have access to the single market without the application of EU principles to the UK, including but not limited to open borders, contributions to the EU budget, and the application of appropriate EU regulations and directives, it seems that the "we only want access to the single market" argument is little more than a smokescreen for EU membership by any other name. Obviously this would not be acceptable, since the electorate would have weighed up all the pros and cons as part of their consideration of the issues before committing to the ballot. That said, we are talking real politics here, and it is inevitable that there will be some give and take between Remoaners and sceptics in Parliament over the coming months and years. Once Article 50 is invoked, it is up to the government to negotiate the terms of the exit, as the government has negotiated all international treaties in the past, and then it is up to Parliament to either accept the results and ratify any treaty or to reject it. Rejecting the treaty will result in hard Brexit, as it is unlikely that the EU will be willing to go on a merry-go-round with the UK Parliament, and in any case, time is limited. If the UK government wishes to maintain tariff-free access to the single market, it will be in the interests of the government to negotiate a deal acceptable to the UK Parliament. And equally, if the UK Parliament wants access to be maintained, it will be in their interests to be reasonable with their demands to the UK government. I rather think this is the way that the political system is meant to work. Of course, the Remoaners lose ground and the argument moves on. The current wheeze is to suggest that we need transitional arrangements. This even seems to have traction within the government itself.
I'd just like to move on to the question of transitional arrangements for leaving the EU. Do you think they're going to be necessary?
There is, I think, an emerging view among businesses, among regulators, and among thoughtful politicians, as well as, I think, probably quite a universal view among civil servants on both sides of the English Channel, that having a longer period to manage the adjustment between where we are now as full members of the European Union and where we get to in the future as a result of the negotiations that we will be conducting would be generally helpful, would tend towards a smoother transition, and would run less risks of disruption, including, crucially, risks to financial stability, which must be a very real concern.
Can I take it that the answer is yes?
That's another way of putting it, yes.
Yes, okay.
On the surface, this appears to be another means of delaying or undermining the Brexit process, and I can understand why the sceptics would argue against it. Literally, no one trusts either the EU or the government, to be honest, so a clean break following Article 50 in its most simplistic terms is what is needed to rebuild that trust. In addition, it seems to me that the 2-year period between invoking Article 50 and the UK leaving the EU is the transitional period as set down in the article. if we are not actually leaving and cludging together some sort of halfway house between membership and non-membership, then I can understand the need for a long drawn out process. But we are not. We are withdrawing from all the EU treaties, no ifs, no buts. What possible negotiation is required? And then we're back to the single market argument. Personally, I rather like Redwood's take on this.
I think if we generously offer 0 for 0 on tariffs, say to them, we don't want to charge your goods tariffs, but we will have to if you charge our goods tariffs, they will see that they will be a massive loser from tariffs, and I think, therefore, we will end up with a very good outcome.
Of course, he's being completely disingenuous here. The EU is simply not going to allow free trade with no strings. But that is rather the point of the whole referendum, isn't it? Redwood's argument, however, is very simple. It provides clarity and certainty and would absolutely honour the government's commitments to deliver the result of the referendum.